So 3 years ago, very short amount of time, this was a very popular and funny meme about how well or how much of a threat AI image generators were for our jobs. Now, only 2 years ago, it had improved this much. And it's not technically today, it was Wednesday when I did this in person. This was the prompt that I used in ChatGPT 5 to create the image that you see here of these 6 versions of a handshake. Now, this is what we're going to be talking about today because it's very professional looking and realistic looking, except for when it's not. So, today I have 4 tips for avoiding AI fails so that you hopefully can still get the most out of AI without getting embarrassed or suffering any ill consequences of it. So, first, I would like to ask you all how you're using AI or if you're using AI. But in the chat, there were a couple people talking about flowcharts and drafting, work drafting. I see a few more people have added in coding because that word has gotten bigger. Travel planning, agendas, itineraries, emails. So since a lot of you are staff members, this is a lot of your tasks that you might be doing during your work. Summarizing notes. Yep. Thank you for that feedback. Um, in addition to the ways that you've identified as using this, me personally, these are some of the ways that I know people I know are using AI, and they range from my coworkers to other working professionals at other places and students and everything else. A lot of the things that you had all mentioned, the brainstorming, the outlining, I instruct the LIB 1600 course that we have here at ISU. And in my first icebreaker discussion board for this term, I asked the students to use the AI of their choice to tell them which D&D base class or which Dungeons and Dragons base class character it would create for them based on their personality and the questions that they could get it to ask them. Content generation, like songs, images, videos, and text. I have a few people who use it for that I know of. One of my friends who works elsewhere in another state uses it daily to break down his large tasks or give him suggestions on what he could focus on for the day, or he'll give it what he wants to focus on or what's most pending, and then it will break that down into smaller tasks for him for that day. And then very few people that I know of have used it for emotional support, but I included this here just because it's been something that a lot of people have been doing that's been reported about in news of all age ranges, adults, kids, even. So I wanted to include that in here. Right now, we're not giving this a value judgment. We're not going to say whether these uses are good or bad or ethical or unethical or any of that. We're just talking about how are people using it. And because we're here at ISU and I'm an instruction librarian, I wanted to look particularly at how students are using AI. And it's what you would expect. This was from a survey that I'll have the information for here in just a second, and I have it in my references. But the students that they surveyed use it for searching information and getting explanations, generating ideas, and the writing support. They used it, they said, to save time, improve their work, and to get instant support when other supports weren't available. I mention this because these are some things to keep in mind about avoiding AI fails. How do you want to use it? Why do you want to use the AI? What do you hope to get out of it? And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into these as this presentation goes on. So the first tip is understand how all this works to the best of your ability, because that's going to affect things going forward. When you have a generative AI, and that's basically what I'm going to talk about this whole time here, is generative AI. How does it create the response to your question? Like, how does it actually work? Yes, you are all correct, and the majority of you are correct here in that AI uses tokens and statistics to create its response. Let's talk a little bit about what that exactly means. I have a lot of text-heavy slides coming up here, but I really like the way that they explain this, so I'm going to try and break it down a little bit, and I will share a copy of this presentation with you all afterwards if you would like. So the AI output is literally they represent mathematical models that map specific segments of text and symbols, those tokens, in the request from you with segments of text and symbols in the answer. Now, another way to say this is that bolded part down there. It's basically the AI's guess at what a syntactically appropriate string of text would look like for that question. Stated one more way, it's telling you what it thinks an answer would look like for your question. So the difference between this and what humans do is very important to understand because that should affect how you're approaching AI and how you're using it. So humans, when we analyze content and meaning, that's how we create answers to questions. That's how we converse. That's how we summarize things. But these tools are just looking at the patterns that they've received from their training material and applying that to your question to create a convincing mimicry of language. And it's not to say that these are all wrong or they're not right, like they're incorrect. They are very convincing and they are often correct. But this means you need to keep that in mind because you may or may not know what training data was used for that AI. If you're not already aware of this, I hope you will be after today. Hallucinations are a common problem, and they will happen regardless of that training data. Hallucinations are when an AI's response is convincing, but is completely false. There are also different types of AI, and how they apply those token patterns and frequency and what they can pull from also varies depending upon the types of AI. The example I give here is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, and that is supposedly less prone to hallucinations because this gives the AI a corpus of things that it can pull information from for your answer that is in addition to its testing and training data. And I'll give an example of that is like Google LM, their Notebook LM, excuse me. That's an example of retrieval augmented generation. If you're unfamiliar with this tool, you all have access to it through your ISU account and your Google connected account for ISU here. And what you do with the Notebook LM is you can upload certain documents like text from a PDF or any document that you've created or someone else has created. I think they even do videos now, especially from YouTube videos, since that's part of the Google sphere. And you can then ask questions using their chat bot that it will pull answers only from the works that you've given it. So it won't rely as heavily on its training data, which can be out of date. And usually they do have a certain cutoff date, and you may or may not know what that date is. So these are kind of laying the foundation for what I'd like you to be thinking about when you're considering whether to use AI, how to use it, and how it could go wrong. So tip 2 is to use the AI tool that fits you as a person best. And what I mean by this is to consider the ethical implications of AI in general. So when I mention poisoned fruit here, I'm saying, are you comfortable using a tool that has effectively stolen other people's work for its training data? There are several pending court cases about Anthropic and ChatGPT's use of copyrighted materials in their training data, and no compensation being given to the people who wrote those copywritten materials. So how comfortable are you with using that tool? How comfortable are you knowing that these tools have exploited the emotional work of other human beings and possibly caused lasting trauma? This link here the cost to human reviewers is a link to one of the documentaries we have available at ISU through Canopy that talks about the people in African nations who were charged with going through the early stages of these outputs from AI and marking things that were offensive, dangerous, plainly disgusting, and helping create those safeguards for all of us when we use it. The other thing is, how comfortable are you with the idea of algorithmic bias and maybe not knowing the exact algorithmic bias of the tool that you're using? And what I mean by that is what information was used in that training data, and more importantly, what information was kept out of that training data, and how might that affect the results that you get from it? For job displacement, how comfortable are you using a tool that displaces or reduces the value of someone's career, say graphic designers or even authors? There's been a lot of talk about the environmental costs of not just these programs, but the data centers that run them and the data centers that had to run during their training, because that's typically where the most environmental cost comes from, is the training of these models, not necessarily their upkeep and all the questions that we ask of them now, but that is still a consideration. And as I said, there's been a lot of talk about this, and no one can quite agree on just what those costs are as far as dirty mining and water costs and electricity costs. But one estimate from MIT was that a chat GPT query consumes about 5 times more electricity than, say, a simple web search. If you're a student, which may not pertain a lot to you all as staff members, but your effect on learning. If you're asking an AI tool to constantly summarize something for you, you're robbing yourself of that practice. So think about what your educational goals are and what effect using that AI might have on it. There's also the ethical concern of how easily these tools can be used for dubious or outright malicious purposes. The deep fakes that are out there, but also military use and surveillance of people. And then finally, just who all has access to these tools and who gets the training on how to use them and how that might impact our society as a whole. The other thing you should consider around ethics is privacy and data. As people associated with ISU, Copilot comes with additional privacy safeguards that is not going to be present for ChatGPT, for example. So because we have an institutional license to Copilot, they're not going to take your chats and use them to train their model further or use it in any way, or use the data that you upload to them, the documents that you might upload to them. Whereas ChatGPT will, and you'd have to read through the terms and conditions, actually read through that horrible document for all of the tools that you might want to use and see what you can opt out of, what controls they are giving you, because you and your actions on their platform are the product that they want. You are what they want to see and use for future trainings as well. And just as a blanket statement, you should never be submitting sensitive, i.e., like personally identifying information, or proprietary data, like documents that have that kind of data, to these AI tools. Basically, if it's not publicly available, don't put it in an AI. There have been recent news articles I've seen where Anthropic got in trouble. They put out the Claude AI system tool where people were doing Google searches and chats from Claude were coming up in the Google searches. And this happened with people who were trying to share their chats with other individuals, but not online. And they were accidentally being crawled by Google's search engine because when they shared their chat, it was creating a whole new website for that chat. So that's been fixed, but just think to yourself, if I didn't want everybody on the internet to see this, I probably shouldn't be putting it in a chat with an AI tool. Okay. The tip 3 is to use a tool that fits your needs best. And what I mean by this is how much time are you willing to devote to learning how to use it? Not just how to prompt it, but how it works, the best features that it has, what features you need, or which ones, how they work, basically like the RAG Notebook LM versus a Chat GPT chat interface. How much access do you have? You've got certain access to tools through your ISU account, but most other AI tools are all going to be freemium. So, are you willing to shell out money for the possibly higher quality version of that AI? Um, how much time are you willing to devote to double checking the claims? Because even if it looks plausible and it looks correct, or maybe most of the time it is correct, you should still be double checking anything that an AI generates and puts out. Um, Also, how much do you know about the topic that you're investigating? And this is something I try and highlight with the students who want to use the AI tools. If you're not already very knowledgeable about the topic that you're investigating, it's going to be that much harder to spot the hallucinations that these AI tools create. Because when you're an expert in something, it's easier for you to notice right off if something seems slightly off or wonky. Whereas someone who's unfamiliar with that field or topic might say, oh, that sounds perfectly plausible. And finally, how much are you willing to risk if things go wrong? I always think of this quote from Othello because you're ultimately the person whose butt is on the line when something goes wrong with AI. ChatGPT is not going to get in trouble. You are for whatever you did with its output. So think about the risk versus rewards. When you're thinking about risk, balance it with your need. So I have a continuum here of risks and what you might need. And I have some suggestions on what might be higher risk and lower risk. So the higher risk things tend to be things that, of course, medical advice, which involves private data, um, very intimate data, and data that could have a huge impact on you and others, along with the emotional support and like analysis or anything related to being true or false definitively. Those are all going to be on the higher end of risk because if you need something like that, the possibility of a hallucination is still there. So double checking becomes that much more important. If it's something like a lot of the ways that you all have mentioned you use it, outlining, suggesting steps, examples, ideas, things where nobody's life or health is on the line, that's very low risk. And in general, I would say for the high risk ones, just don't go there. If it's lower risk, you still need to take these other considerations I'm mentioning into account. But sure, go for it. There's not many people who will be impacted negatively by it if there's a hallucination or something goes wrong. And finally, the fourth tip here I have is constant vigilance. You always have to double check and you always have to disclose. So it's essential for the students too, when I talk to students who are using these to write their papers or to edit drafts that they want to submit for journal articles. You always have to do these two things. No matter how often that, regardless of how often your AI tool has been correct, you always have to double check it. So, how do you double check these things? It's going to be based on you identifying what are some of the things it's saying, any of the claims. Can you Google it, do a Wikipedia check or a fact check from a website on is this even true? Does this even exist? SIFT is the method that we teach in the LIB 1600 course. This link here will take you to a freely publicly available version of the course material. And then Mike Caulfield is the originator of SIFT. He's the one who came up with the SIFT method. I have a video here that I believe we have time to show. It's a really great example of how someone identified the claims and then double checked them. Yes, Mad Eye Moody, constant vigilance. That's where I get it from. Um, the The example here from Facebook, I like to show it to everyone in case you don't have a Facebook account, because sometimes people don't have those anymore. But it does contain salty language. If anyone is uncomfortable with salty language, then for the next like 7-ish minutes, you might want to just mute it. But you should still be able to read everything if you need. So I'm going to see if this will open for me.
If you're a student who is using ChatGPT to help you in your research, I really need you to listen to what I am about to say. I'm not like a huge user of ChatGPT, and I have a lot of thoughts about the ethics of AI in general, but as a fun experiment, I decided that I needed to do some quick and dirty research for an article that I'm writing, and I was like, fuck it, let's see what happens. I've been working on this article for about 4.5 hours, and I can tell you, quite honestly, that at the end of this process, not only have I wasted the past 4.5 hours of my life, but I have an absolutely unusable article, especially at a time where we're having a lot of conversations about like media literacy. I really want to talk about this. Okay, so for context, I write a weekly-ish column for Playboy magazine about sex and intimacy, and somebody wrote in talking about how they are struggling with the idea of sex and intimacy due to everything that's going on in the world. And that made me curious, and so I said, okay, well, I wonder what other women have said about sex and intimacy during times of war. So I go to ChatGPT and I say, hey, I'm looking for places where I could source quotes from women about struggling with intimacy during times of like war and economic depression. ChatGPT comes back and says, cool, you should check out the Mass Observation Diaries, Nella Last's diaries, the Federal Writers Project, and a few other things. Great. I'm already familiar with Nella Last's diaries. Nella Last was a woman who kept this like incredibly detailed and elaborate journal of her life living in England during World War II. And I was like, oh, Nella Last, that would be a good place to start. Then this happens. ChatGPT gives me this quote and says it's paraphrased from Nella's Last War. And it's, I wonder if I'm growing cold. I've so little warmth for anything beyond the chores and the fear. My husband tries to comfort me, but I can barely respond. I'm always braced for the worst. So I'm like, paraphrased? That's weird. No, I don't want a paraphrase quote. Just give me the direct quote. And ChatGPT says, no problem. ChatGPT says, cool. Here's a couple of quotes you can use from Nella Last's diaries, like this one. I feel so on edge I could hardly bear will to touch me. War takes all my strength, there's none left for affection. And then this other one, I sometimes think there's a thick wall around me. I can't seem to feel anything but fear and worry. And here's a date, and here's the page where you can find it. And this is where you need to start paying attention. So I head over to the Internet Archive where the collected diaries of Nella Last are available for free, and I'm like, I'm just gonna check to make sure that, you know, I've got my citations right. Let's just look at the first one. I wonder if I'm growing cold. My husband tries to comfort me, but I can barely respond. So the thing about the Internet Archive is that they have it set up so that you can search inside any book by keyword. Let's take a keyword, comfort, to try and find this quote. Comfort and joy. Okay, so 29 results. So we're looking for it, we're looking for it, we're looking for it. Can't find it. And I'm like, okay, well maybe it's a fluke. Let's try a different keyword. Let's try respond. Huh. Okay, well, ChatGPT said that that was a paraphrase of a quote from the book, so maybe let's try one of the ones that it says is a real quote from the book. Let's look at this one. I sometimes think there's a thick wall around me. I can't seem to feel anything but fear and worry. Let's go with thick. That's a fun word. Boop. Okay, 19 results. We look, and we look, and we look, and we look. Spoilers, that quote also doesn't exist. So at this point, I'm sure you can guess the punchline, but I want to show you what else happened after this. So I specifically tell ChatGPT, don't paraphrase, give me direct and specific quotes, especially from the Mass Observation Archive, and please provide a link or source. Covering my bases, making sure that everything works. So it gives me a bunch of stuff, including, oh, here's one from Mrs. X. There are nights I dread asking him for affection. I'm too tired, too afraid. I pretend to be asleep. And this quote was reproduced in Wendy Webster's Not a Man to Match Her, A British Women's Attitudes to War, 1939 to 1945. Except that book doesn't exist. Not a Man to Match Her by Wendy Webster exists. It's a biography of Margaret Thatcher. It has nothing to do with World War II. So I then asked ChatGPT for a few more suggestions of other women who were writing during wartime. ChatGPT recommends me the following. Franny Duberly, who was writing during the Crimean War of like 1854. Mary Chestnut, who was writing writing during the American Civil War, Grace Elliott, who lived in Paris during the French Revolution, and Eliza Andrews, who was another woman writing during the American Civil War. ChatGPT pulls these great quotes for me. A monstrous dread is upon us, overshadowing all, that some new blow is about to fall. Here's the link to where the text is on Project Gutenberg. You go to that link, and it's The History of Rome by Titus Livius. Now, luckily for us, you can access her diary online, so let's go straight to the primary source and see if we can find the quote. Monstrous dread is upon us. A monstrous dread is upon us. Nope. Yeah, but how about Fanny? How about Fanny? Let's check Fanny. We had some friends to dinner. You can also find Fanny's diary right here online, so let's just go ahead and do a little control F-ing. We had some friends to dinner. Nothing. Okay, well then let's just look at, I don't know, dinner. All right, cool. We got 32. Let's go through, see if we can find it. It doesn't exist. At this point, just to see what happens, I go back to ChatGPT. And I'm like, hey, robot, literally none of these exist. Fanny Doo really didn't say this. Eliza Francis Andrews didn't say this. Like, I need you to find me exact phrases, citable, searchable quotes, not paraphrased, not often attributed. I need to go to the primary source and find the exact quote. And it says, okay, fine, no problem. So let's look at Fanny Doo release. And here's this quote that is definitely for real. Christmas Eve, and there's not a sign of merriment in the camp. Okay, so we go to Christmas Eve. All right, that's a good one. Okay, so we go back to our Fanny, and we type in Christmas Eve. Does Fanny have anything to say about Christmas Eve? Oh, she has one thing to say about Christmas Eve, and it's the 2 previous days condensed in one, and this is Christmas Eve. How many hearts in our sun camp must feel sad and lonely today? Still not a real quote. Okay, well, what about Eliza Francis Andrews? This one even has a link. Just kidding. It's The Founder of New France by Charles W. Coley. It's not The Wartime Journal of a Georgia Girl by Eliza Francis Andrews. And even so, that quote also doesn't exist. Now, at this point, I'm not going to lie to you, I started feeling guilty about just the amount of water that I was wasting beating this dead horse, so I decided to shut it down. But I need to be so specific when I say that in doing the research for this article, had I not gone to the primary, well, actually, not even had I gone, but had I not known how to look up the primary sources and source those quotes, I could have wound up publishing an article that was just full of information and quotes that did not exist. Everything about it looked right. There were links, there were proper attributions, there were quotes, there were all of this great stuff that ChatGPT just did for me right then and there. But instead of actually having a viable article with useful quotes, I have literally nothing. If you are a writer, if you are a student, if you are a researcher, it is...
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. And bounce out of here again. So what I like about this video is that it exemplifies a lot of the tips we've talked about today. So she was considering something, she was considering a use for it. Okay, she obviously knows a little bit about how these work, and she wanted to see if it could do what it needed to do for her. So she knew her needs. I need direct quotes, I need actual factual information that you can trace back definitively, and she knew how to follow up and double check. I just also want to point out here, it's not just double checking like, oh, does Fanny exist? Does this other woman exist that it was listed? It's not just that kind of a fact checking. You saw her go through and fact checked every single claim, the person that they existed, that they actually said what ChatGPT said they said, that the resource, the name of the resource actually existed, that the link existed, that the link was correct. And she was doing a good practice there because her job or her reputation as a writer for this column would have been on the line had she not done those things. And she obviously has a background information about this topic and these sources to know how to look up the primary source material and when things might have looked off, even though they looked plausible. Now, she was using ChatGPT for this, and I don't know if Google's Notebook LM was available at the time, but I think in this case, if she had used a more appropriate tool, she might have been able to get better information from her AI output. So, for example, if she had used ChatGPT as a bouncing off point to get ideas of different sources where she might find information on this topic, and then gone to those sources herself to make sure they exist and that they're about the correct thing instead of, being about Margaret Thatcher, then she can take that text, if it's available like it was in the Internet Archive, and place that text inside the Google Notebook and then ask it specific questions, knowing that the Google Notebook LM would only be pulling from these sources that she had identified. And another nice thing about Google LM is that it highlights the exact claims that it makes. And the highlight, if you click on it, will take you to the source that it got it from within your pool of sources you've uploaded and directly within that source. So it's not just saying, like ChatGPT, it'll say, oh, I got it from XYZ website. Well, XYZ website might exist, but it's not going to tell you where on that website it supposedly got its claim, which makes it a lot harder for you to be double checking. And that's something you have to be doing every time if you're looking for things that are factual, that actually have a definitive yes, no kind of thing. Let me pull up my last few slides here. Okay, so we talked about the fact checking part of our constant vigilance. The second part of that is our disclosure. Um, it's going to vary depending on what you're doing. For students who are trying to do an assignment, I tell them go to the style manuals. A lot of them now have explicit guidance on how to cite ChatGPT or how to disclose your use. Ask your professor, look in your syllabus. Does your professor have specific views or a gradient on what you can do? Do they want you, for example, to provide the original output that you got? Or do they want you just to show the track changes in a document or just do a disclosure statement? For faculty, I like to share this video from our Associate Professor of Accounting here at ISU, Christine Dennison. She has this video that she shows to a lot of her students in her classes about how to use generative AI ethically in her courses. So some students, some faculty and instructors offer really explicit advice. Others don't, and you might have to ask them. If it's something like a journal article, go to the actual journal that you're trying to submit to and see if they have a statement about disclosure. For example, in my presentation on the first slide, I had this simple disclosure statement that I used ChatGPT 5 to generate that image of the handshakes that I showed you, and that I take full responsibility of the content. That's also an important part of a disclosure is what tool you used, how you used it, and then stating that you've reviewed it and you take responsibility for this content. So you could put like ChatGPT was used in this document for clarity or to increase conciseness or however you used it. So to summarize things for today, you need to be able to understand to the best of your ability how the tool you're using works, whether that's going to the About Us page on that tool's website and seeing what they say about how it works and taking all of their awesome jargon with a grain of salt because they're going to overstate what their AI can do, probably. Looking into the background of these things, maybe just watching a 10-minute video on YouTube about how AI works, what different types of AI there are out there, so that you know, oh, if I'm using Google LM, I'm using retrieval augmented generation and how that affects your output. Using the tool that fits you as a person best, what you're comfortable with, and using a tool that fits your needs best. How much risk are you willing to accept? And what do you need? Do you need an idea? Do you need an outline? Or do you need a fact? And then always double check, always disclose. But I want to pause here and see if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask right now or anything that is on their mind that they would like to talk about. Lana says, I hadn't considered the ethical implications. It makes me not want to use it at all, even for simple things. I think that's a really good thing to consider. Like, could I be using something else for this task? instead of an AI based on what it does. But also take some of that with a grain of salt because there are lots of things in your life that you may not have considered the ethical implications of, from owning a dog to flying to the clothes that you're wearing. There's lots of information out there about the environmental impact of owning a carnivore for a pet. Um, where you get your clothes and fast fashion has a huge impact on the environment and on the people who make those clothing items. Flying has a huge impact on the resources that we use, but people still fly a lot. So, you know, I do want people to think about this, but you just have to figure out where you're comfortable with AI tools, just like you would figure out where you're comfortable with all the other things in your life. So thanks for that comment. Did anyone else have any other reflections they wanted to share? Lana says that's a lot. Now I'm thinking about all the other things, and I know it's a rabbit hole. Thank you all for coming. And if you have any other questions, feel free to unmute and ask. Otherwise, that's all I got for you today.